What made you instantly lose interest in your crush? I actually have a boyfriend, but I really like you, so I didn't tell you. She said this to me after sex. Later that week she told her boyfriend about cheating. He told her he was also cheating. She didn't like that and ended it with him. She wanted to get together with me. I told her to go fuck herself. She told me she slashed all her ex's car tires and laughed like it was a totally hilarious and normal thing to do. Granted, he was a dick, so I sorta realized she was a bit off and I distanced myself big time after that, to which she angrily responded by slashing my car tires. When I was 14 I met this boy who had a crush on me. He was extremely nice and really knew how to compliment a girl. I had fun with him and he made good jokes. I started to get a crush on him too. Then after a while he suddenly started making not so funny jokes only about me, my appearance and women in general, like go make me a sandwich type of shit. I immediately lost interest and turned him down. Years later our mutual friends told me he is a toxic and violent control freak and plays nice until he thinks he owns the girl and thinks he has to show who has the power. I'm glad I dodged the bullet. She freaked out at a waitress, because the butter that came separately with the bread had rosemary in it. The waitress apologized and quickly came back with plain butter. My crush then spent the whole meal complaining about the waitress. I swear I found my crush very sweet and nice before that. Edit, grammar. I was apparently asleep when I originally wrote this. I've never really had full-on crushes, but there was this one girl who I did like a bit. One time when I was at school I was with my friends and one of them tripped over and was crying because she had done something to her ankle. Then we noticed that the girl who I sort of liked and all her friends that were with her were laughing their asses off while my friend was on the ground with tears streaming down her face. Actually dated my old crush from school at one point. We'd become good friends and ended up trying something. Behind closed doors she drank too much and had a vicious temper. Broke it off there and said she'd need to curb the drinking for her own health. Wished her all the best and would still support her if she needed it. But I never want to put myself in the position I was in ever again. The realization that she flirted endlessly with every guy in the room. We grew up together and went off to the same college. We had a lot of good talks, lots of good car rides home and back, and I thought there was a connection. I realized she was toying with guys for meals and gifts and it occurred to me, there was zero reason for her to not do that to you too. I talked to her when I ran into her after that, but moved on. From our mutual friends, I understand she wanted to settle down and start a family, but most guys assumed she was with whatever guy she was flirting with last. I'm guessing she lost interest in me, which is fine. I can respect that, and probably would have still had a crush but left her alone cause that's what respectable people do. But rather than just being upfront she ghosted, ignored me, so I completely lost interest. I'm not going to waste time with thoughtless people. Probably her plan all along but still a bit shitty, so it all worked out for the best. We were talking about MCU, and I said I loved the films and had watched them. While I was explaining why I didn't like Civil War as much as Infinity War he dismissed my opinion by saying diaresis to enjoy the film you need to have watched all of the others diaresis. To my answer diaresis I have diaresis he explained, patronizing. Diaresis there's like 40 of them diaresis. The conversation died when I replied diaresis I know, I've watched them diaresis. I could almost see his brain making the connection woman equals and not a real effin'. She almost threw my cat across the room. She came over after dinner and we were hanging out. In comes my cat. He doesn't like being picked up or cuddled, but he will jump in my lap and cuddle me. So I told her that and not to pick him up. She picks him up because my cat loves it when I do this and gets in his face. He meowed warning number 1 from him. Then she kept doing it and he slapped the shit out of her. Then she almost threw him, but I grabbed him and kicked her out with the "I told you." Never heard from her again, and that was 3-ish years ago. I had a huge crush on this girl Natalie in high school. She was super smart and nice and dorky, so precisely my type. We were friends and I was always trying to flirt with her in my usual clueless 14-year-old kind of way. One day, a guy in one of our classes is doing a survey on our opinions of gay marriage. This was something like 7 or 8 years before it was nationally legal in the US. He was a really nice kid, and I'd have considered him a friendly acquaintance. Natalie, on the other hand, was actually his friend. He was a barely closeted dude, and I figured all of his friends would share my progressive views, so when the survey sheet was passed around, I was surprised to see homosexuality is a sin and gays are an abomination before God written in Natalie's tight cursive hand. Never have I lost interest in a woman so quickly. I can't believe they're still making us wear masks, and this was a while ago, too. Like, maybe this can be interpreted as a not horrible take now with a lot of people being vaccinated, but I think this was even before the first vaccine was approved. Then, a separate one. Ugh, vaccines are full of chemicals. Dude sent back a bottle of wine after he'd tasted it just to see what would happen. It got worse from there and ended when, after a very long political discussion, he mentioned he wanted to be able to use the N-word. Very white guy, in certain situations. First date. Oh, and he's not vaccinated because he's scared of needles. NHS. I took her out a day to eat and she lost her phone, so I was calling in hopes we could hear it ring. I heard it, found it, and discovered my contact name in her phone was free food. I ate my food, enjoyed dessert and then went to the bathroom, but in actuality I skipped out on her. During the following week I get lambasted through text about how much of a shit individual I am. Her dad even shows up at my house and tried to manhandle me. I told him to ask his daughter why my name in her phone was free food, so I thought I'd teach her a lesson in that I have a name and I don't deserve to be called out of my name like that. This is way back in the mid-90s, but she turned out to be completely bonkers. Setting the stage, we worked at an amusement park together. I was a freshman in college, and she was a senior in high school. We were about 8 months different in age, if I remember right. I asked her out on a date, and she said yes. It was great. I'd never gotten a crush before. We went out, had a nice time. A very nice kiss at the end of the night, and I was going to see her at work the next day. I was in early to pick up my gear from the ops office to manage my ride unit for the day, and saw her walking up to the gate. I said hi. She smiled and said it back. Then she asked if we could talk for a few minutes. I checked my watch and I had time. So she proceeds to tell me that she liked me, but didn't like me. I'm thinking, well, okay, that sucks, but whatever. There are hundreds, or thousands, more girls working the park with me. If I really want to date, I've got one. I told her that was alright, and that maybe I would see her around. I walked to my ride thinking that it was all over. Not optimal, but that is how dating goes. Fast forward a few hours, and I was the only person from my shift that day that was certified on the panel for my ride. So I was stuck, not going anywhere. Not to the bathroom or to lunch. And BD, I get a call and it is my crush, asking if we could go to lunch together, and I told her how stuck I was. She pauses, and then says, "What's happening here? Are you breaking up with me?" I'm stunned. 1. We weren't going out, we had been on one date. 2. She had told me that it was an no-go, so I said as much back to her, and she starts screaming at me that I can't break up with her. She is the one that breaks up with people. I tell her that I don't have time to talk, and that I have to mind my panel. I hang up the phone. About 10 or 15 minutes later, Some dude calls the ride and asks for me. I answer, and he asks me, "Dude, why did you break up with Melinda? Is it because she's fat?" I shouldn't have responded at all, but I did, and said, "There was nothing to break up. She's not fat. Goodbye." About 5 minutes later he calls back. Before he could finish his sentence I told him to never call again, or I would take it up with his supervisor. So the crush calls me back an hour later, crying into the phone, begging to have me back. WTF, I'm sorry, but I did not sign up for this. I was dating this guy for a few weeks a few years ago. One night I got called into work and he was really upset I cancelled our plans. He ended up driving to my work to surprise me and insisted on waiting in the parking lot for me to get done. I wasn't gonna be off for like 4 more hours. Later that week, I told him I was a little set off by it and that he needed to respect my work hours. He says okay, so I think everything's fine. Next time I went to work, he sent me a photo of him having injured his hand and demanded I leave to take him to the hospital. I called it quits that day. Sorry dude. She didn't know her left from her right. We ended up fucking a few times though. I got into the habit of pointing to the left or right for her. I still do it sometimes when someone else is driving and I'm directing them somewhere. Another said something along the lines of, "Well, the Lord never gives us something we can't handle." I noped out of that one quick. Another was just insanely immature. She called me up to give her a ride somewhere. I said sure. It was a 30 minutes drive and 10 minutes and I wanted to kick her out to my car and make her walk. I had a fucking headache by the time we got there. Just the most inane, vapid, never-ending conversation about celebrities, who's fucking who, reality TV episodes, rumors, gossip, etc. Also she never once asked anything about me. She just sat there the entire time talking at me about all this stupid bullshit that I fucking hate. It seemed like she would constantly change her opinions on things just to agree with me. It also felt like some of her interests were not genuine, that is picking up new hobbies BC she thought it was cool when other people did them and not because she actually enjoyed it herself. While shooting pool with my former crush, back in the 90s, she made multiple jokes about people with autism. Deal breaker for me because that is just wrong on so many levels. I have a cousin with autism. I taught preschoolers with autism for 6 years at that point. Shows that she either didn't know what I did for a living, or thought I'd be okay with it. Ghosted her after that night. This might strike a chord with some people, but asking for my zodiac sign, it's fine as a conversation starter, but when someone is legitimately deciding whether or not to go out with me based upon when I was born is an immediate red flag to me. Whether or not you believe in assigned traits from zodiac signs, it shouldn't be a deciding factor for you. Give that person a chance. Everybody is so uniquely different. You will find someone you're compatible with belonging to any star sign. You may surprise yourself. As a teen, when she suddenly seemed interested in me after I stood up to her when she treated me like I didn't matter. So that's how she treats people who she thinks she can abuse. Looking back, I wonder if I secretly just hated myself and also didn't know how to handle her being slightly interested in me. Sure, she didn't have the best character, but come on. The reason that nothing happened between us was because I was even more socially awkward, anxious, than I was horny. Not because I had super high standards. She told me please don't hurt yourself over me. In hindsight she probably had some manipulative dick threaten to her hurt themselves if she wouldn't date them or whatever. But at the time all I could think was, bitch, you're not that great. I'm not going to jump off a bridge just cause you don't want to date me. It wasn't anything she did or said that broke the spell. It was the realization that having a crush is always one-sided, having been through that far too many times, without any result other than disappointment and stinging, acute loneliness. I got my head straight. I'm still alone, but the wounds of pervasive loneliness are easier to bear than the pouring salt in them with unrequited longing for a fantasy version of someone else. He got into a relationship, was a super close friend of mine, and I just didn't move fast enough. I cried about it, and then about 2 weeks later some guy asked me out and I ended up dating him for a while. It was my first real relationship and it was destructive, made me realize I had no idea what love was, and my crush was better in my life as a beloved friend than a failed attempt to understand relationships. I'm ashamed BC he did the right thing, but it really turned me off. I was in high school and met a guy who was in college. I liked him a lot. I've not been very attracted to many people in my life. At that point, he was only the second guy I'd met while I was a high school student who I was really into. I was feeling chemistry during the convo and wanting to date him. We were together for a couple hours. He'd been assuming I was older than I was BC. I was with older friends of mine. When my actual age came up, he froze and his demeanor changed. He moved away from me to another part of the room. I could feel that he was rejecting me BC of my age, and that hurt my feelings. I was legal in that state, and I felt like when you have a nice connection going, something like a minor age gap shouldn't matter much. In retrospect, I can completely understand why a senior in college backed off from a junior in high school. But at the time it felt so unromantic to me, like he valued convention too much and didn't appreciate how valuable it is to meet someone you're really clicking with. I still partly liked him but simultaneously didn't BC. I was disappointed that he didn't have my same values in that way. Months later we ran into each other again. He was very flirty that time and tried to arrange a date, but I turned it down. I was still hurt about the earlier rejection, which was pretty immature of me, proving his first response to my age correct smile. We hadn't seen each other for years and reconnected on a coffee date. Politics came up. This was 2016, and she went on a diatribe of R.W. Born diarrhea, brain rhetoric and conspiracy theories. In that same meetup she saw two gay men kissing and called it disgusting and then disparaged some homeless people under her breath as being lazy blacks. It felt like I was being pranked. Never saw this behavior in her years before, but it was evidently there. I can't pinpoint where and how she lost all of her critical faculties, but we never spoke again. Hearing how arrogant they ended up being, entitled, arrogant, snarky, people like that often seem so charming and fun to be around until certain conversations or actions happen. I'm not perfect, though. I've unconsciously said things that were really bad, but I think that's due to fear of things becoming commitment. I hate myself for it and wish I could apologize, but lessons learned. I also don't like when someone I really like starts groping me and doesn't stop when I tell them to. It happens a lot and I don't know why. One guy full-on grabbed a boob and refused to let go despite my consistent telling him to stop. Then he began to pout like a child. This was a 36-year-old grown man, pouting because I wouldn't let him grope me. I ended contact immediately after leaving. I confided in him that I, at the time, was waiting to hear back after an MRI where they suspected I might have a tumor. He said we shouldn't get together until after I get the results because he wouldn't want to date the dying girl. I was talking to this girl for about a week. We went on one date. It went okay, holding hands at school and silly stuff like that. After 1 week of talking, not dating because she didn't like labels, apparently, she asked me if I loved her. I told her we should see other people. Edit, spelling. After being sexually assaulted by another man, accused me of being even worse for sleeping next to her in the same bed, while having feelings for her. The amount of disgust she apparently saw in me sort of worked as a mirror, as I no longer found her anything but disgusting.